There's all sorts of drivers for our customers, and the more we listen, the more questions we ask, the more curious we are, the more we'll understand and the quicker we can help to achieve their outcomes.
Welcome back to the Thoughts on Selling podcast. Today it is my pleasure to have Guy Rubin, CEO of Ebsta, joining me from across the pond. Guy, good afternoon. Tell us a little bit about Guy. Who is Guy Rubin?
Well, Lee, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Big fan of the podcast. So, as you say, my name is Guy Rubin. I'm the CEO of a company called Ebsta. We're a revenue intelligence platform. My passions include soccer. I'm British, so I watch a lot of football, what we call football, but you call soccer. I'm a Spurs fan for my sins. We're not doing very well this season, but there's always next season.
There is always next season.
There's always next season, absolutely. So, yeah, I'm a father of two. I'm married. I live in London. I'm passionate about data. I'm passionate about the art of selling. I'm also an enthusiastic skier. I also enjoy listening to podcasts about all things physics. There's a little bit of background on me.
All things physics. I wouldn't have expected that. Tell me more.
I'm just fascinated about how the universe works, and the world seems to be changing very quickly, or at least our understanding of the world seems to be changing very quickly. And certainly over the last kind of 5 or 10 years, the world of physics and our understanding of how everything works has changed so dramatically. And I find it fascinating to try and get away from watching the news and cycles and get into facts and science, and data is my happy place.
So Neil deGrasse Tyson is one of your sources, maybe?
Yeah, we have British versions, but yes, I'm a fan of his. He's very good at taking very complex ideas and distilling them into things that I can understand. So that he's always good at those kind of things.
You know, which is exactly the opposite of what enterprise salespeople do.
I like the link. Well done.
We take really simple things like improving manufacturing productivity and throwing a ton of techno speak at it. And by the time you're done, the head of manufacturing quality goes, I don't even understand what you just said.
Yes.
Right?
Well, as VPs of sales and CROs are my valued customers, I'm going to respectfully disagree and suggest that they do everything perfectly.
I'm going to throw a flag on that play. Maybe your clients and my clients, who are the cream of the crop, get it, but they're great unwashed. They're struggling. And I have to tell you, having been in sales enablement for 15 years and before it was called sales enablement, most technology organizations do tend to throw a lot of techno speak at their salespeople.
Yeah, look, one of the things I'm passionate about is helping leadership take responsibility for the failings of their sales teams. I think we see far too often sales teams underperform, leadership cut the bottom third. Then we go off and hire everybody else's bottom third. And then we spend more money on marketing because that will solve everything, right? And then shock horror, we miss target again and off we go around the same circle. So I'm a big believer, and we've got a lot of evidence to suggest that if leadership can take ownership of bringing those B and C sellers along the journey, we can get them replicating the A players' behaviors. And by doing that, we can get them to achieve very similar outcomes to the A players. So if your team are underperforming, it's your fault, not theirs.
I've heard that stated occasionally. Very few sales leaders do take that ownership. Let's take a dive into your background, Guy, because you are at a place now where you're providing some fascinating insight into how sales leaders can help their teams perform better. I want to understand how you got there. Give us a little bit of your journey.
When we started in business, we weren't in revenue intelligence. That wasn't our core focus. We set out to address a very specific problem, which was the data quality and the consistency and accuracy of the data inside Salesforce. So lots of organizations use Salesforce. Most of them struggle to keep it clean and up to date. So we built an engine. It uses AI, but it was before AI was a term we could all be proud of. And what we effectively do is connect to our customers' mail servers, their calendars, their phone systems. And what we try and do is understand all of the activity and most importantly, all of the personas, all of the individuals that the team have engaged with during the entire customer life cycle. So everything kind of once a customer enters the sales process all the way through to signing off, and then obviously the retention of the customer, the cross-sell, the upsell opportunities. We are obsessed about understanding all of those interactions and making sure that all of that activity gets recorded in the system of record. That was all we set out to address. And the next step on that journey for us, we developed what we call our engagement score. And it was a way of...
Wait. Before you go there, let's talk more about your founding principles. You and I are in violent agreement on the difference between the system of record and the source of insight. 80 or 90% of interactions happen by email, and maybe a little bit less today with the younger crowd with texting. But over time, most of the significant interactions happen in email. And historically, that's been invisible to sales management. I'll footnote that with many years ago, I co-founded a company that was going to do some data mining into email servers in the late 90s. And when I went to a dozen CIOs and said, Are you interested in this? They said, absolutely. This is really cool. And I said, where does this show up on your list of priorities? They said, it doesn't. So we killed it. You've taken that same approach of mining the interactions and insights in email and brought that to the front. Was there an aha moment that caused you to get there and do that?
I double down on your point, right? We went out to address this problem, and pretty much every company in the world that uses Salesforce, and there's probably over 1/3 of a million companies out there using it now, they all had the same problem. They all had the same challenge with data quality. However, when you looked at it against the other priorities in the business, it was always a 7 out of 10. So we had a huge addressable market, but actually whether customers were interested, it doesn't matter how easy you make it. And we've made it really easy, but it was always perceived as a big problem to solve, and it was never the priority to fix. The aha moment was when we were going down this journey and fixing data for businesses inside their system of record. And when we started to look at the data, and when you say it out loud, it sounds obvious, but the opportunities where there was more activity, the opportunities that were more multi-threaded, that had more engagement with more stakeholders, were the opportunities that were closing. And so all of a sudden, we kind of put the two and two together, and that took us on a journey into what we now call revenue intelligence. So we still sell what we call relationship intelligence, this piece of the puzzle that fixes the data. We try and keep it very cheap and easy to implement. There's no change management. There's no new buttons to learn, right? All we're doing is fixing the data in Salesforce. For us, that's just the first step on the journey. And in an AI world now, not that we knew it at the time, but in an AI world, having consistent, maintained, up-to-date data with confidence that it's not being maintained by a salesperson when they've got time, but actually a machine is consistently recording all of the activity, all of the engagement. It gives you that level of consistency that allows you to then report on that data.
It's not just consistency, it's trust in the data. It's not just that the data is there, which happens sometimes in CRM, it's that it's accurate. Yeah, I'd speak to this guy every week. No, you didn't. Your last touch point was, 8 weeks ago. You sent him an email and he didn't respond. What's your relationship score? Oh, it's a 5. No, it's not.
That took us on this whole journey, and we started with what we called our engagement score. So it's a number out of 100 that trends up and down over time. That engagement score then extended out to not just include the sellers. So we connect to the mail server, so we can see all of the interactions happening for people that don't even have a Salesforce license. The finance department, the solution engineers, the support team, knowing that they're having an active engagement with the customer is a really interesting data point that should be back in that system of record. But since then, we've stepped on to introduce, so not just our engagement score, we have a deal score. We score qualification now, so we plug into whatever your call recorder is to pick out from the transcript how well or badly you've qualified the customer. And again, hugely valuable and very consistent in its approach because it's a machine. You can throw the last 1,000 deals worth of call recordings. So all of the deals that have closed, won and lost in the last year, you've got the discovery calls recorded somewhere. And what's fascinating is when you start to unpick the discovery calls and look at the qualification that took place in the past, more often than not, you find perhaps a particular seller has a problem losing a lot of deals late stage. But it turns out the problem isn't the late stage. The problem is that actually they were probably never in a sales process in the first place because they were never qualified well enough to leave discovery. And so you start to see these patterns. And to solve the problem of quota attainment, we see on average that less than 20% of sellers hit quota last year. That's insanely low. And just 14% of sellers were responsible for 80% of revenue last year.
If this were a baseball team, they'd be doing okay, but it's not.
It's not. And sales is really the last department to become data-driven. Imagine talking to a marketing department and them not being data-driven. It just wouldn't happen. We still seem to live in a world where we're quite happy for sellers to spend 70, 80, 90% of their time on activity that doesn't generate revenue. That's just not sustainable. To fix that problem, we have to understand what our top performers are doing consistently. We need to understand what works at every stage of the sales cycle.
What does good look like? How do we get others to replicate those activities, those motions? Yeah.
And if you can combine that and take away all the admin, all the distraction, and you've now got a machine automatically extracting, for example, the qualification. And at the end of the call, the customer gets a green thumbs up or a red thumbs down as to whether they've qualified the customer well enough to leave discovery. You can guarantee that the seller will only get a couple of red thumbs down before they change the way they do their qualification. So the skill set required to qualify a customer correctly is a very different skill set as to how to record that information consistently in the system of record. And while AI is fantastic at extracting consistently the objections a customer raises on a call or what competitors are mentioned, the AI is notoriously bad at building relationships with customers and asking those questions in the first place. So
right.
If we can combine that, if we can allow the technology to do the bit that it's good at and free up the sellers to spend more of their time with the customer, then we end up in a much better place.
What's the role of the sales enablement organization in your customers' environments? Are you providing these learnings to sales leadership so that they can conduct the remedial services, or is it directly to sales enablement?
It's a really interesting question. So I'll use an anecdote to try and answer it for you. So we've got a PE-backed customer. I was at their kickoff in Barcelona actually in January, and we were presenting their numbers because they've gone through massive transformation this year, and they've gone from single-digit growth to really good double-digit growth. And we've tried to do some analysis on kind of what took place and how did they get there. And what was fascinating was the RevOps team and the enablement team had been preaching a lot of this kind of idea around standardizing the way they do things for 2 years before Ebsta came in. And while they got good lip service from the team, that the leadership, we definitely should do all of that. When people got back to their desks, nothing changed. And the sales process was inconsistent. You had people skipping stages. There was no diligence on the qualification. No one understood which personas were the best ones to engage with at different stages. You name it. Lots of inconsistencies across the business. All we did was take these disparate data sources, sync them up to the system, and then extract from our platform all of the insights. And the difference, just by taking the leadership through the RevOps team, but taking the leadership through the data and say, look, on average, your win rate's 12%, but on average, you're only engaging with 3 stakeholders. But when we get 6 stakeholders actively engaged at stage 2, and one of those stakeholders is a C-level, and we get a finance persona with an engagement level of 67 or above before we leave stage 2, our win rates are 38%.
Yeah, minimum viable requirements for a deal.
And suddenly, when they saw it in picture format, now the penny dropped. Now they understood why they were being asked to multi-thread or why they were asking to be much more consistent in their qualification. And suddenly the leadership gave the RevOps team the power to share these insights, these pictures with the team and explaining to them why they keep asking them to be more multi-threaded or why they need to get that finance persona engaged before they leave stage 2 or why they need that level of qualification to be 6 or above. So all of these things meant that they were able to explain to all the stakeholders, whether it was leadership, the RevOps team or the sellers themselves, as to why these things are being expected of them. And the beautiful thing about sellers, even the B players, is that they all want to win.
They all want to be better. They all want to make more money.
So if you can show them that playbook and make it super easy for them to understand why you're asking them to do that, they'll follow that playbook if it means they're going to make more money.
Yeah, Guy, it amazes me that organizations haven't gotten this in the past. I'll share 3 personal examples. I took over sales for a $10 million business services firm, a company called By Appointment Only that sets appointments. And the Salesforce instance was full of data, good data, really good data. And it wasn't perfectly maintained. There had been no CRO there before or CSO. And one of the things I saw was the confidence level in a deal was attached to the stage. When we moved from stage 2 to stage 3, the confidence was incremented. And I said, wait a minute, I don't want Salesforce to tell me the confidence level. I want my rep to tell me. And so I changed it. And then one of my reps came to me and said, Mr. Levitt, I think Salesforce is broken. And I said, why? And she said, because my confidence didn't increment. I said, yes, I want you to tell me. And she goes, well, that's not how we used to do it.
I'll give you a very brief story. So we went from relationship intelligence, then we introduced revenue intelligence, which is effectively pipeline inspection and forecasting tools. So all of our pipeline inspection and forecasting tools sit inside Salesforce on the opportunity records or in its own dashboard. So what was fascinating, when we originally launched it, we didn't introduce the ability for the reps or the managers to put in their own upsides or commits because the AI did it for us. We've done all this analysis, we've fixed all the data, we've built all the benchmarks. We know how likely this deal is to close and, what date it's likely to come in, irrelevant of what the rep says. So we don't need them to put it in, right? We had to retrospectively fit those features in because everybody wanted the ability to put the numbers in. And kind of fast forward 3 years, the journey you end up going on. And it's really interesting because some sandbag and some are over optimistic. If you take forecasts into quarters, looking at how accurate their forecast is 2 and 4 weeks into the quarter when we started with them versus a year down the line is night and day. And it's fascinating to see how the predictable forecast number is always on point, right? Because it knows. And there needs to be a volume. You need a minimum of, say, 50 deals that have closed one. But assuming you've got that, the AI can tell us when the deals are likely to close. But the seller and the managers always want the ability to put in their own commits and upside. And it's been a fascinating journey, and we had to make a change because of it.
Interesting. At Oracle, I was part of an enablement team that was embedded in the field. We had no access to data. It was all the sniff test. And most of us were experienced sales leaders on the enablement team. And it was a sniff test. Is this guy telling me the truth? What a good sales manager would be doing too. Conversely, at Google, in global enablement, we asked literally for years, give us visibility into the impact of our enablement investments so that we can shift our investments as appropriate. And despite the fact we had the tools and the resources and the capabilities, visibility on the data so we could make those decisions wasn't considered important.
Yeah, how the world changes. A lot of the organizations that use our platform can be anything from kind of 20 to 25 sellers up to thousands. And when you go into an organization that's got a couple of hundred sellers, you've got multiple sales managers doing individual pipeline inspection and review meetings.
And they're not consistent because they've all come from different organizations. Some of them have grown up from salespeople. Others have come in from wherever. And there's no unified selling methodology. There's no unified sales management or coaching methodology. The technical term in the US is it's a freaking mess.
But just by fixing that, by introducing that level of consistency across the board, by making sure that every pipeline inspection meeting, before the meeting, the seller knows what questions are going to be asked because they're all listed on the opportunity record. The manager, when they get into the meeting, they don't need to spend half an hour listening to the blah, blah about how great the seller is and how they're definitely going to buy and they love us and they think we're great. None of that matters. They're able to be very structured about, right, okay, it's great. These are 5 things that are going better than expected on the deal. And here are 5 things that aren't going as well as expected. It looks like we're struggling to get engagement with the C-suite or with the finance persona or the operate, whatever it might be. If you can't get me access to that persona, we need to close this deal off as lost or hand it over to somebody else, because we know that if without that persona engaged, our win rate drops to X%.
You are pattern matching and you have removed the happy years.
And making it easy for managers and sellers to go have a consistent process irrelevant of which manager or seller happens to be in the room. And just introducing that level of consistency will have a material impact and an uplift on quota attainment.
It's not just consistency, Guy. It's consistency based on what's worked in the past. Because consistency for consistency's sake doesn't guarantee good results. It's based on historical results.
Absolutely. And our sweet spot are businesses where maybe 20% of the sellers are consistently hitting quota. So we know that they've got product market fit. And then you've got this kind of long tail of underperforming sellers. And it's so easy to have a big impact on those organizations because you fix the data, you build the benchmarks, and then you deliver the insights. And you see time and again that quota attainment increase. And it was why last year we introduced our first brand guarantee, where we will now allow customers to walk away if we don't increase quota attainment in 6 months. And it's been a game changer for us.
And my guess is that hasn't been exercised very often.
We've never lost a customer to it yet. So
that fits in the category of not very often. That's brilliant. What are some of the more interesting insights? And you don't need to mention company names, but here's an example. Again, back at Oracle, I had a sales leader who said, we know, right, similar to what you've described, we know if the customer hasn't gone to an executive briefing, they are not doing a $10 million deal. Full stop, right? You can sell all you want, but until you get their time and dollar commitment to actually moving their executives to our headquarters and spending a day or 3 with us, they're not doing a transformation with us. What kinds of things have you found?
Specifically with the larger deals, for example, we did a piece of work with a top 4 consulting business, and they were working very, very large deals, average sales cycles of 18 months. And the bid teams that were working on those deals could be 40 or 50 people. And every 2 weeks, they'd have to go and request the wooden dollars to pay for the team that are working on the bid. And they were only winning about a third of the deals that they were working on, but the cost of sale was huge. And what we did was we went back and looked at all the closed lost opportunities in the previous year, and you could see about 2.5, 3 months before they closed lost, the engagement with the C-suite just fell off a cliff. And so seeing that level of visibility, understanding the momentum or the lack of it, if they'd known about it sooner, they could have either course corrected earlier or indeed just closed the deal off as lost much, much sooner.
Disqualified earlier. Yep.
Every year we produce a benchmark report. This went live a month ago. If it's okay with you, Lee, we'll include a free link to the benchmark report for the download for the subscribers to the podcast. Last year, we analyzed 655,000 opportunities that represented over $48 billion worth of pipeline, and some fascinating takeaways from it. And this is the first year that we didn't just look at the left-hand side of the bow tie. We also started looking at the insights for retention. So fascinatingly, our existing logos generated more new revenue last year than new logos. And when I say ours, I'm talking about the B2B SaaS industry, right? So in B2B SaaS, we generated more new revenue last year from existing logos than we did from our sales team going out and hunting new logos.
So expand rather than land.
Last year, expand represented 52% of new revenue, which I thought was fascinating.
How much does that vary either by customer size or by seller size? Do you have that at your fingertips?
I don't have it to hand, but I'm sure it's in the report. I'll dig it out. But some fascinating data on the retention side, because this is, as I say, it was the first time I really went into that in a lot of detail. And if the last 2 QBRs before your renewal are done at C-level, you are 7 times more likely to open up a cross-sell upsell opportunity. And by the way, while average win rates for new logos was 18% across the board, the average win rate if you open up an opportunity for an existing customer is 45%. Now, if the last 2 QBRs before the renewal are done with someone below the C-suite, you're 4 times more likely to churn the customer at the renewal date. So the relationships really do matter, and relationships lead to revenue. So knowing not only are we engaging with this customer, but which personas are we really building that relationship with? And most importantly, if a C-level engagement starts to drop off, it's a really good early indicator that there may be a problem at the account.
I hear customer success managers applauding loudly. I've worked with some very good CSMs who, in larger accounts, they might have a 10-year run with a company, whereas the key account director or the lead salesperson or the technology reps or the pillar reps, they might be in and out in a year or 2. And so the CSM and maybe the sales engineers, and I had one sales engineer on the same account for 10 years, and he had worked at that account first. The institutional knowledge, the tribal knowledge of the account is incredibly valuable. And what you're saying is that knowledge can be pulled in to help with the overall expansion. Here's another interesting point, Guy. When we looked at 25 years ago, and we looked at mining information from mail servers, we weren't looking just at salespeople. We were looking at the interactions of CSMs and SEs and so on. And you're getting the same thing. So you're getting that full picture of the relationship. And frequently, the lead salesperson doesn't even know that there's a Sev1 problem going on. And, 5 SEs are pulling their hair out to try to fix it. But the customer sure knows. It influences the relationship.
Massively. People don't mind that problems happen. They care about how we deal with them. One of the interesting data points we saw in last year's data in the latest report is that nearly half of companies are now expecting their sellers, their AEs, to take some responsibility for top of funnel, but also to be responsible for retention. And it kind of makes sense. When I started in sales, I was responsible for everything, right? You had to go and generate your own leads, and then even after you close the customer, you were still responsible for. We kind of went through this transition, the kind of Salesforce model, I suppose, of all these kind of single purpose vehicles across the whole sales cycle. And while in theory it sounds great, the challenge is that handover points for the customer have never been particularly well managed. If I built a good enough relationship with you to get you to sign a contract with me, then why wouldn't I maintain that relationship at least in the first 6 to 12 months, when is the most likely chance you're going to start spending more money with me? And one of the other byproducts of that is, of course, now as the seller, I no longer have this urgency to get every penny out of the deal day one, because I get to hold on to the account for a lot longer. So the sales cycles can be reduced, and we can upsell the customer very quickly after they've done the initial deal.
One of the things I love about professional services is that account managers tend to hang on to the accounts after the purchase. So for us sellers, most sellers believe that their work is done when the customer signs the contract. For the customer, it's the opposite. The work starts when the contract is signed and when they have access to the technology or consultants or whatever. And the experience of the implementation is a rich set of stories that most salespeople miss out on. And I, as a seller, want to be able to say, I've worked with similar companies and here are their experiences, and here's what happened, both good and bad. Here's the change management you'll need to undertake so that you can be successful. And then the risk perception goes down.
Yeah, I agree. And from the survey we did, so in addition to the customers that powered the report, we also surveyed 2,000 CROs and VP sales. And from the data that we're seeing, I expect that 46% number to be larger next year, with that kind of full cycle sellers being more common than not moving forward.
I hope you're right, Guy. I don't really see that pattern. I see that specialization you mentioned of BDCs or SDRs getting meetings, and I've onboarded literally thousands of SDRs. And my first message to them was, you may be the first, and this was even at Oracle, you may be the first touch point of the brand to that company ever. So you better make it good, right? It's not just the, hey, got a minute? Hey, sorry to bother you, but be professional, because you're going to color, good or bad, the perception of the brand forever. And so I agree with you. That specialization is not healthy.
There's certainly still a role for, I think, at least for top of funnel resources, CSMs and so on. What we're seeing is in the data is that the seller is taking more responsibility. So it's not necessarily black and white, but certainly we see that the top performers are 2.5 times more likely to generate their own opportunities. The top performers are closing 30% of their opportunities offers lost at the discovery stage. Top performers are buying from more C-level stakeholders in those early stages of the sales process than the rest of the sales team. And the list goes on, right? So the same applies to the ongoing relationship with the customer. They've built such a great relationship with them. They trust them well enough to sign a contract. Let them take advantage of that and support the customer through that initial phase.
So discovery. The traditional view of discovery is we're going to ask a lot of questions so that we can scope the project. My perspective on discovery is it's a process of co-creation. The seller should come in with a business value hypothesis and shape the conversation and be ready to pivot, be ready for new learnings, and co-creating a new way for the customer to do business, help them discover different ways of doing business. And I don't see most discovery happening that way. And by the way, most discovery is scheduled for like Tuesday at 3. That's not where discovery happens. It happens in every conversation.
Every conversation, absolutely. And the beauty is we now live in a world where most of the sales meetings are happening online and they're being recorded. So what we're able to see is we don't mind what methodology the customer's using, and we don't just measure, your med pick, but we're also interested in things like, active listening or buyer engagement and trust building, defining next steps and questioning techniques and the pain points and discovery and value discovery and so on. So all of that discovery and the usual suspects, the med picks and the medics and so on, that process continues through the stages of your sales cycle. But it's also worth understanding you don't need to do it all in one go. By the time the customer signs a contract, you should be at a level 9 on all parts of your med pick. But you don't need it all worked out overnight. And it's also not all equal.
And by the way, the customer's perspective on what's possible should change over time. When you talk with them on day one, what they think is possible, what they think they should do is different than what they think they should do 3 months later. Otherwise, the salesperson is just taking an order, is just providing a data sheet and taking an order. And there's no room for that today.
The top performers will pivot their proposition to the customer regularly through the sales cycle. They have a way of engaging with the customer that means that if I've added value to you in this conversation, then the next time I call you, your chances are you'll take my call. If all I've done is, talked about your sports team, had a few laughs and then told you to sit down and shut up while I show you how my features work, they're only going to want to engage with you when they've decided that they're ready to buy. And so more often than not, the top performers, it should be a consensus that your time's valuable, so is mine. We're going to go through this exercise together and really work out whether the other 7 projects you've got on right now are a higher priority or going to give you a better bang for buck than what we're talking about here. Because, the thing that we do for you, we could do in 6 months' time, and that's fine. And let's just decide together when the right time is to re-engage on this stuff.
I have a couple of coaching clients at a 3-letter company. I won't mention the name, but Blue. The perspective is customers buy once a year, mostly. They're in a cycle. And we better offer them a big discount so they buy this cycle rather than next. That's the financial perspective from sales leadership. On the ground, I'm coaching my clients to ask the customer, do you have the bandwidth to handle an implementation? Because if not, it doesn't matter how much of a discount I offer you, and then I'm going to poison the well for the future. I want to make sure that you have the capacity to take something on. You're likely to do it, likely to upgrade from 10 to 11 at some point. If now isn't the right time for you to take advantage of that opportunity, whether it's technical or financial, let's not talk about it. I'm not telling my clients to have that conversation with their sales leaders because they might get squashed, but that's a conversation they need to have with their customer because that's the authentic conversation.
And ultimately, it won't get signed off anyway, right? The chances are it won't happen. So you might as well find out earlier. And actually, you can influence the conversation. Look, tell me about those other projects you've got on, right? Maybe the ROI on what we're doing is higher. Maybe we can get it done quicker. Maybe if you do our project, you won't need to do 2 of the others, right? Let's understand what's going on in your world. And what are you going to get remunerated for? What gets you your next promotion? How do we get you there, right? And if you need to get these other things out the door, fantastic. And if I can help, if I know someone who might be able to help fast track that, great. Now I'm a trusted advisor. So again, it's certainly in B2B sales, and the more complex the sales process, the more important it is that we build trust and we come across as that subject matter expert, so that chances are the buyer hasn't bought this thing before. The chances are also that they haven't got a predefined budget for that thing.
I very much prefer that. If I walk into a situation and there's an existing budget, someone else has set the spec.
Agreed. We actually started a rip and replace motion. We have a particular competitor that is very expensive and doesn't seem to be giving a lot of return on investment. So we've done very good on our battle cards on those ones, and we're doing well at kind of converting those customers. And again, just trying to understand very early as to, when is that renewal coming up? We know what the time frame is likely to be to rip and replace. So let's make sure we kind of dial into that as well. So there's all sorts of drivers for our customers. And the more we listen, the more questions we ask, the more curious we are, the more we'll understand and the quicker we can help to achieve their outcomes.
Guy, this has been a fabulous conversation. We could probably go for another 3 or 4 hours, and we will. But for this one, I want to do a quick wrap up. Key takeaways. Number one, you can run sales thoughtfully using insights that give you visibility on what actually works, as opposed to gut feel, as opposed to last story told. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge that sales leadership and revenue operations can leverage that doesn't exist in Salesforce, that what good looks like can be replicated. We didn't dive into this, but we talked about the B and C players. Sales managers spend too much time on C players. The typical coaching is that C players are a waste of time. Let them go. What I heard from you is you can show them the model in which they can dig out of being a C player and become a B or A player by changing their behaviors. Other takeaways? What did I miss?
Look, we live in a world now where in sales, you absolutely can and should be data-driven. There's no excuses anymore. No more gut feel. No more arm around the shoulder. Everything will be all right. All of that's gone. Okay. We're too busy. We've got too much to do, and we're too focused on scaling. And the only way we're going to be able to scale our go-to-market motion is with consistency and data-driven insights. And so Ebsta is certainly not the only player in the park. There's lots of people in this space we call revenue intelligence. But if you aren't investing in benchmarking, in fixing your data, and then turning that data into benchmarks, and then using those benchmarks to prompt your B and C players as to what to do next, if you're not doing that, your competitors are. If you're not growing, at least double digits and well into double digits, then you need to be thinking about why haven't we got that level of consistency in our business? And as I mentioned before, if you want a brand guarantee, we'll guarantee to get more of your reps hitting quota if you reach out to us. So there's our plug.
That's a pretty compelling call to action. Guy, where can people find you?
Reach out to me on LinkedIn. If you mention the podcast, I'll definitely accept the invite. And for those that are interested in understanding the benchmarks a bit further, you can download the report for free at ebsta.com, and I'm sure we'll include a link.
Yep.
And I welcome feedback on the report itself, but also come and tell me how you're pacing against the industry. I'd love to hear how people are getting on, what they're doing better than others, and where they're struggling, and always like having this conversation. So please do reach out.
I appreciate the time and the insights, Guy. Thank you.
Thank you very much.